This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I am going to be talking to Keith Phipps, who is a writer of great repute, writes for places such as Rolling Stone, Slate, The Daily Beast, GQ, Gentleman's Quarterly. Is there an apostrophe there somewhere? I bet there is. You can follow him on Twitter at kphipps3000. And we're going to be talking about his brilliant new book, his first book, but an absolute cracker to come out with, The Age of Cage. Can you imagine a better title, not just for a film book, but for a century? We'll be calling the 21st century The Age of Cage, and maybe the latter half of the 20th century as well. If you like the episode, please remember to do all the things that I ask you to do every single episode. I'm sorry if I'm boring and I repeat them, but it's really, really good if you do that. And our numbers are going up, and that's great. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY, although I imagine you already do that. But if you don't, get on Twitter and do that for me as well. And I don't think there's anything else to say. So enjoy the Cage-full conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of goes back to when I was very young, and I used to just kind of obsessively peruse the newspaper looking at movie ads for these films that looked kind of, strange or mysterious, sometimes scary. I remember really obsessing over like the ad for Scanners, the David Cronenberg film, which of course years later would become a favorite, but it's like when I would have been like 8 when that came out, and I was like, what is this? A man's head explodes? Would I actually want to watch this? But I mean, a real moment was stumbling across Siskel and Ebert's show on PBS and kind of realizing these are people who got paid to watch, but also talk and think about movies, which sounded pretty good to me. And from there, I just I read my local critic was Terry Lawson, and in the Dayton Journal Herald. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and started reading things like Leonard Maltin's movie book, which was huge, and I'd kind of go through and try to watch anything that was 3.5 or 4 stars, which I ended up seeing a lot of great movies, and then a lot of stuff there's edit it for local broadcast, cut to pieces that made no sense to me at the time. And then, I was a film critic for my junior high school newspaper. And then to kind of put it on hold for a long time, became an English major in college, went to get a degree. I got a master's degree from University of Wisconsin-Madison, which I ended up not really loving grad school, but my first job out of that was I took a job at a video store, as you do when you get a master's degree, and I kind of caught up with movies I'd never seen. That was my film school. Caught up with a bunch of movies I'd never seen while doing freelance reviews. Most significantly for the AV Club, which was at that point the entertainment section in the back page of the print edition of The Onion, and the editor of The Onion, Rob Siegel, who later went on to write The Wrestler, wrote and directed Big Fan. Most recently, he did the Pam and Tommy miniseries on Hulu. Introduced me to the editor of the AV Club, Stephen Thompson, who is now at NPR here and runs part of a podcast called Pop Culture Happy Hour. A really great writer, entertaining, and a great person. Gave me my first job, introduced me to my wife. So I owe a lot to Stephen. So I worked as assistant editor for a long time. Became editor of the AV Club. That lasted for a while, and then it didn't. And then I helped start a site called The Dissolve, which was Pitchfork's film site for a couple of years, which was, I loved doing that. My favorite job. And it was too beautiful for this world, I guess. It lasted 2 years. I worked at a place called Uprocks for a while. I've been freelancing for the last few years, just kind of anywhere that will, that wants me to write for them. So, that's kind of floating around, from place to place. I have really great relationships with sites like The Ringer. I write for GQ's website a lot, which is a lot of fun. TV Guide, Vulture. Those are my regular places now. But I really want it, well, and I should also say that my longtime co-worker, Scott Tobias, and I started a newsletter recently called The Reveal. It's thereveal.substack.com, where we can just do whatever we want. It's kind of like our own personal space. But I really wanted a big project. I've always wanted to do a book. I've contributed to books and helped edit books, but I never had a book of my own. And I floated around a bunch of ideas. I was introduced to a really great agent named Peter Steinberg, who helped me kind of shape my ideas, and went through a fair amount of rejections and discarded ideas. But I came to write this book after seeing Mandy in 2018, and realizing that I'd always been an admirer of Nicolas Cage, and who was like right there from the beginning of my really intense interest in film, like Raising Arizona and Moonstruck. Were both films I saw in the theater and really made a deep impression on me as a junior high kid here. But I realized as someone who'd been kind of is still in the picture, still doing really interesting work. It was a surprising performance in a really remarkable film, and I thought, there's probably a story here. I mean, he's been around in so many different eras of Hollywood, which has changed so much since he started. And kind of like the very, very tail end of the 70s film movement. I mean, he started in the early 80s, but he's working with his uncle Francis Ford Coppola, who's still hanging around there, and he's witnessed to and participated in so many changes over the years. So let's look at his films, look at his career, and let's see what changed and how one reflects the other over the years. So that was the long origin story for the book and for me, I guess.
No, that's brilliant. That's really interesting to get the shape of your life up until this point. But by the way, one thing I have to ask for I'm always interested in American culture. When people say things like Dayton, Ohio, I kind of have this familiarity without knowing anything about it. I sort of go, oh right, yeah, Dayton, Ohio. But I don't. What is it? A smallish city, a biggish city? What's the?
What's the British equivalent of a town that used to produce a lot of cars, but now, or car parts, but now kind of doesn't do anything anymore?
Sort of. You take your pick: Glasgow, Newcastle.
Okay,
Liverpool.
let's just say it was like the American equivalent of a Newcastle suburb or something.
Right.
Sort of like, but with less of a distinctive culture. I think Newcastle seems like a very distinctive kind of place on the map. But no, it's in Ohio. It's a suburb of Ohio's like sixth biggest city, if that gives you. And Ohio being one of our 50 states here in the United States.
It sounds like when you write a letter to somebody and you're in primary school and you write your address and at the bottom you put the Earth, the universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But basically, middle of nowhere, and definitely not a great film culture city. Although there was a great art theater that was pretty influential growing up.
Yeah, I kind of guess that was what I was trying to get at, is the sense that when you say Dayton, Ohio, there's a kind of slant to it that I kind of recognize, but I have no knowledge to sort of back it up, Whereas it would be the same if I said Barrow-in-Furness to you. You would go,
sure.
Uh-huh. But you wouldn't know that for any English person that would be in the middle of nowhere,
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I lived in England for a year. Actually, I studied abroad in Lancaster.
Right.
So
I have Barrow-in-Furness is quite close to Lancaster.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, I have a little bit more knowledge, but no, not a deep knowledge of English geography.
Oh well, you beat me in terms of my knowledge of American geography anyway. So going to Mandy, what was the occasion when you watched that? Did you see it just a festival or a normal screening, or what was
just a normal screening at the Music Box Theater here in Chicago, which is our kind of really the last old time style movie house and our best art theater here, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. So I just happened to go to a screening of it, and it's kind of a light bulb moment.
And that sent you on a journey, sort of, to go back and to have a look at his other stuff, and then pitch this as a book.
Yeah, I mean, as I was exploring the idea, well, let's see if I actually could do this. So I went and picked out a couple recent VOD movies, 211 and The Humanity Bureau, neither of which are particularly distinctive films. But 211 was the first one, or maybe 211. I don't know how you say it. But it was the first one I watched of those, and it's not a great movie. It's not a horrible movie, but he's really interesting in it. Here's someone who's still, he's playing in someone who's grieving, and he kind of has this body language of someone who's been alone and not really, it's become kind of awkward just being around other human beings. And this is, there's a really thoughtful performance that the material didn't necessarily even require. He's still, he's not phoning this in. I can't say that I followed his 2010s career that extensively, because so much of it was under the radar direct to streaming stuff, but I caught the ones that bubbled over. I had seen too, and was quite impressed by his work in them. So okay, well, let's look at the big picture here, and then I kind of scoped out what became the film. It's who was he when he first started out? Who was he as a star in the 80s? What happened after that? Because there's a few years after Moonstruck where he seems to try to run away from what would be a really sensible, easy path to movie stardom, and then he wins an Oscar and becomes an action star. It's such an odd career path in some ways, but in the 90s he's at the heart of how action films are changing, and some key texts in terms of the evolution of the action movie. He's just there. He's there at every stage. He's doing something that's both interesting in itself and kind of a neat or an informative reflection of what's going on in films in general.
And it's so crazily higgledy-piggledy, his sort of career. It's sort of going all over the place. Mm-hmm. But I think people really forget how quickly he made his mark. Because I remember watching Moonstruck and being really like taken by it, because that came out when I must have been a relatively youngish guy. It was like a movie your mum would want to watch, and then there was he as this really interesting sort of presence there, really eccentric but fascinating
and completely compelling, and doing his own thing, but in a way that fits into the rest of the film too, which can't have been the easiest task. But yeah, he was, suddenly huge. I mean, Raising Arizona was the first one I saw, and again, I was like 13 or something when that came out, 13 or 14. So I'm just really at the age where you can actually start to maybe sort out, pay attention to what's going on and sort out and provide some sort of context for it. But if you watch something like Valley Girl, his first starring role, he really pops in that as well, as an unusual screen presence. I mean, part of what really one of the origins for the book was when I was an editor at Uprocks. I did some Nicolas Cage, science and Nicolas Cage pieces, and my friend and the great writer Noel Murray kind of looked at his early career and said, basically he fit in by being a misfit. Which was kind of unlocked an understanding of what was going on then. But like, he doesn't really, he's a contemporary with the Brat Pack, but he's not really a part of that. Even in Valley Girl, where he's playing a teenager, and he is, I think he was 19 when he made that film, he already looks like a grown-up, and it works in the movie. It works, but it's like he's not someone you're going to cast in the Breakfast Club, although apparently at one point that was a possibility. He was in the mix for that as well. But he just, it's his whole, aura is not, carefree teen kid, or even like teen kid of any kind. He's already kind of a grown up, So I mean, that's, it's interesting, but it's also like, what do we do with this guy? And he finds interesting ways to fit in to Hollywood in those early years, sometimes in Coppola's films and sometimes not, but it's not like he's not like a natural fit into what was going on at the time either.
And he has a very ambivalent relationship to being a Coppola, part of the Coppola family tree. So obviously he changes his name, and he's kind of quite resentful, I think, of people thinking he's only there because he's his uncle's nephew.
Yeah, he talks a lot in his early interviews or interviews he gave in the 90s about how, he grew up as like the not poor kid in Hollywood in Beverly Hills, but definitely not, he's not someone who was showing up at high school in sports cars and things like that. And, he saw his uncle had a tremendous amount of wealth. A lot of it was heavily leveraged and could have lost it if Apocalypse Now had not been a success. But I think, he described himself as being a little like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights around that. So I think there is that. And he was mocked by his co-stars for being a Coppola early in his career. And I think, a lot of, there was a big desire to at least separate himself from that as at least a name. I mean, he's still appearing in Coppola's films. He appears to be quite close to his uncle in many ways, but he wanted to kind of also make it on his own in other respects.
How would you characterize his sort of style of acting? Because it's not like I recently, there's been a lot of hoopla about the method with various actors doing various things, and I've just finished. I read Isaac Butler's book on the method, and I was kind of thinking of where would Cage sort of go. I mean, what does he? Because he's not trained. He's not done any acting at school, has he?
He has a little bit at a school in San Francisco. His name's, I wrote the book, but his name's escaping me. But no, not. And he performs a lot in high school at a high school that produces a lot of actors and has a really influential acting teacher. So he's not untrained as such, but no, he's not, he hasn't gone through method training or gone to Juilliard or anything like that either. But I mean, it's tough to pin down his style, and it remains tough to pin down his style because there is a lot of he's quick to cite German Expressionism, Caligari, Nosferatu's explicitly referenced in Vampire's Kiss, within the film itself as inspirations. He does a lot of expressionistic touches like that. But on the other hand, like from Birdie through Pig last year, which I think is one of his best performances, he's also really capable of this kind of spare, quiet, naturalistic acting style. In the David Gordon Green film Joe, he's so quiet in large parts of the film. His voice is low and it sounds different from his normal voice. He has a really bushy beard. Like if you didn't, it's, he's not unrecognizable, but if you didn't know it was a Nicolas Cage movie, it might take you a second to say, hey, that's Nicolas Cage. But he's otherwise not really someone who disappears into roles in that sense. But I also feel like, he every role is deeply considered. I mean, he spends a lot of time crafting and thinking about what he does. So I don't know. Isaac could speak to where he falls in the spectrum of 20th century acting, the 21st century acting now, I guess. But it's a little elusive. There's not like one label you can put on it.
All the better for that, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, Raising Arizona, that's the first film you saw with him in as a kid, and I mean that was certainly one of my favorite. I don't think I saw it when it first came out. I think in England there was a real sense that the Coen brothers, or they certainly came on my radar. There was a guy called Jonathan Ross who used to do the Incredibly Strange Film Show, and he'd do little documentaries where he'd sort of Sam Raimi, doing the Evil Dead films, and the Coen brothers.
We got a little bit of that in late night television. I saw a few episodes of that, and it seemed to be really influential on Edgar Wright and a bunch of other English filmmakers and critics.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely that introducing these new sort of like, they're not auteurs from the 60s and 70s, they're 80s directors who you're interested in. There was another show, or like, I don't know if you'd call it a show, but a programming of film, which was on BBC Two on a Sunday night called Moviedrome. And it was introduced by Alex Cox, who then went on to do Repo Man. That was our film school. That were just those lists. Going back to Raising Arizona, so I saw it a bit later. I think it'd already been out for a fair few years, and I'd just been knocked over by it. It's just such an amazing comic performance.
It is, and I get asked a lot what my favorite Cage performance is, and honestly, until people started asking me, I didn't even think about it. But I think I have to go with Raising Arizona, both for sentimental reasons. I mean, it was a key film to me growing up. It was the first time I saw a Nicolas Cage performance, so that's relevant to this book. But I also feel like it's a lot of what he does really well, which is this big physical performance, explicitly in that case inspired by cartoons. But that character is just so deeply human. I mean, it's a really rich and deeply felt performance. And by the end of it, I mean, it doesn't take long to really fall for this guy and want the best for him. And by the end of that film is as moving as any end of any movie I know. I mean, it's like, I don't know that too many other actors give you that balance. I know at one point, I know Kevin Costner was considered for the role at one point, and I love Costner. He's great, but I cannot picture him doing this performance at all. I can't really picture anyone else doing that performance.
It kind of almost defines Coenism, if there's such a thing. It's a defining thing, and yet you get the feeling that they weren't 100% necessarily in control of it. It feels very cagey as well.
It seems like there's a fair amount of tension between what they are directors that come in with really explicit ideas, and I think Cage as an actor comes in with ideas of his own. And it sounds like that was not always the easiest collaboration, but what you get on the screen is fantastic.
Maybe that's what they need. I think when sort of Coen brothers, I'm a huge fan of their work, but when you feel the cast is a little bit too respectful of them. You might not. You sort of need somebody to be rattling around in that box they create.
It seems like people either work with them once or work with them again and again and again, and it might be something, it might just be an approach that appeals to some actors and not to others.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. There's a Clooney who comes back for more, and then there's the Cage who does one job and that's it. He's not part of the ensemble. And so going on into sort of when he's hitting, when is he really hitting stardom, do you think, or when is he getting into that, I don't know, that A-list?
I mean, I think Moonstruck could have been that. I read about this in the book, but there's a Los Angeles Times profile that came out in early 1988 because the film was kind of a slow burning hit. Like, it just kept playing and playing, and more people caught up with it because movies could do that then in a way that you really can't now. He just seems really uncomfortable with the attention, with being regarded as a sex symbol. And there's two pictures on the page of this article. One is him like kind of looking broody and kind of dreamy looking, and the other is still from Vampire's Kiss, the infamous moment where he eats a cockroach. And it is the duality of where he was at that point in his career. And I think he felt the need to do Vampire's Kiss as kind of a swinging the pendulum back the other way from where Moonstruck had taken him. But I mean, in terms of stardom, I mean, the early 90s are kind of a weird period. Wild at Heart obviously is a key performance and a great film, but it comes out the same year as Firebirds, which is his first kind of dead end venture into action movies, and really not a very good movie at all. It is described accurately as Top Gun with helicopters, but not as good as that sounds. But he in the early 90s after that, though, he's really in a bunch of successful comedies, a couple of unsuccessful ones, but successful comedies like Honeymoon in Vegas and Guarding Tess, It Could Happen to You, and he's just really good at playing a normal guy, and I don't know that any of those make him a huge star, but he's doing steady work, and people know who he is, and he's a name above the title actor, at least, if not always on the biggest possible movies. And I mean, 95 is just a weird year where he gives this really he rarely does supporting roles. He gives this supporting role in Kiss of Death as the bad guy that just steals the movie out from everybody else, and Leaving Las Vegas is later that year. And if you read, it's funny how these consensuses form, but if you read a bunch of reviews from that time, they're all kind of like, well, Nicolas Cage is obviously one of our great actors, and it's just kind of been this slow building appreciation, and Leaving Las Vegas is this kind of this undeniable performance. And then I remember at the time being completely baffled that this next movie was The Rock, which was already in place when he was making Leaving Las Vegas. So it was already his next movie, even pre-Oscars. But that is the moment. That's the moment where he becomes a movie star. Somewhat, all these years later, still kind of, it's baffling to me that happened. But it did, and that's kind of there's a line. You can draw a line there, and everything after that is post-stardom.
I went to see that the Kiss of Death, the film where he's the baddie. I'm going to see it because of David Caruso. Is the lead, who I think you described quite amusingly as sort of like he's doing it. He's trying to get out to NYPD Blue, and then he sort of blips along in movies until he goes to CSI Miami.
Yeah.
Not the best move in the world. But I remember seeing that at the cinema and kind of already really being very obviously very familiar with Cage from all these movies. And just being like, oh, he's doing that now, and it was almost like it was kind of a second, as you say, it wasn't the lead, and so it was like, oh, are you you're going into that stage of your career, and then of course Leaving Las Vegas came out, and it was like, oh no, you're the star.
Yeah, he just rarely since then, you can count on one hand the number of supporting performances he gives, and like again, there's just like so many sliding doors moments in this career where maybe he segues into being a character actor after Kiss of Death and doing those sort of, someone who you call on to do the meaty supporting performances, like a Willem Dafoe type or something. Occasional lead, mostly supporting performances, always colorful, always worth watching. Who knows? He could have done. He could have done Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey, which was in the works at one point, and it, he goes another direction. Superman could have happened. He could have done The Matrix or Lord of the Rings. He was offered both, and it's weird to think what direction that career would have gone in. I mean, with the Superman movie, I often wonder just like what would have happened. What is the butterfly effect of that movie happening on superhero films? Do we get the superhero film as we know it after that? Who knows? And then maybe another universe that they already know what happens.
Yeah, I talked to David Hughes, who wrote the brilliant book about Tales from Development Hell, all the movies that were the best movies that weren't made. And it's always that thing you think, I'd really wish we could have seen, Kubrick's Napoleon, but then we would never have got Kubrick's Barry Lyndon.
Right.
You can't have both if he's doing one, he's not doing the other. I just want to skip back in a suitably eccentric style to The Vampire's Kiss, because this was the film that as soon as I finished reading your book, I dug out and watched, because I'd never seen it before. And this was all the others I was thinking, yeah, I've seen that, or I can live without seeing that, Firebirds. And then Vampire's Kiss, it was like, no, this sounds like it's essential to, and wow, what a film that is.
It really is. And I've screened it in front of an audience recently at the Wisconsin Film Festival. It's the first time I'd ever seen it on the big screen or with an audience. And, there's a ragged quality to it. It isn't all stitched together perfectly. But I think, people, I've heard people describe it as not a great movie. I think it's pretty good, really, as a film itself, as kind of a, now it really plays as this indictment of what we now call toxic masculinity and white privilege in some really interesting ways. But I mean, for Cage, it seemed to be an opportunity to just try out a bunch of acting tricks he wanted to try out. He refers to it now as his laboratory where he did experiments that he could draw on later in his career. And you can see that. I mean, there's a lot of what he does in Face Off in Vampire's Kiss, just for starters. But it's a remarkable movie in its own right, and I'm fascinated by it. It's one I've seen a bunch, and there's always something a little different each time. It is something I talk about in the book too. Is it this is a lot of big moments, but they play, as they tend to get excerpted for like YouTube super clips and memes and things like that, they look different out of context. I think they really work in context, whereas they just, they can look a little silly out of context, or like an actor just kind of, completely hamming it up. And there is silliness to what he does in that film in some ways, but I think there's also a lot of thought behind it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's an exuberance to him. There's a moment where he leaps on the desk of his secretary and sort of says, "Where have you been?" And it's just such a, you could imagine that's not on the page. You can imagine that's him bringing that to the scene on the day. And
quite athletic too. Like I was the first time, this is the first time I realized, like, oh, that's a single cut. There's no stunt person doing that jumping. It's not a small desk either.
No, absolutely. There's a real physical commitment, and I'm impressed. I think it is a good film. I'll nail my colours to the mast. I think it's really unexpected the way it heads off to this sort of story about bullying. It's not where you expect a vampire in New York story to go. You'd expect it to go to, Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie hanging around in sexy nightclubs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very American Psycho in some ways. It's roughly contemporary with it. And you can see bits of it in Christian Bale's performance in that film as well. But yeah, it's tough to pin down too, because it is a dark comedy and it's funny, but it's really, really ugly at times, especially as it goes along. Like the longer it goes along, the uglier it gets. Like his madness tips him over into sexual violence and murder.
Yeah, there is a bit where it's like, I was raped, and mm-hmm. that's not on screen, that's not been seen, but suddenly it's like, oh well, okay, fuck this guy. I'm not,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun until it's not.
Yeah, exactly. So you get The Rock, and you get this. I mean, I guess.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Clay, who lost 35 pounds on Noom.
It's a psychological thing, too. Noom is teaching me the habits so I do not have to be on weight loss meds forever.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom smart. Get started at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This is the part where he's flying into the stratosphere in terms of money, paychecks, and in terms of casting and the roles he's getting. But he's still, choosing really interesting roles.
Right. I think your ability, once you start taking those, once your asking price becomes so high, the well you can draw from for really interesting roles gets a little shallower. I mean, it is, but he is continuing to do interesting work in this. I feel like in terms of his action career, it kind of dead ends with Gone in 60 Seconds, which I think is not a particularly good movie and one of his least interesting performances. But at the same time, he's alternating that with Bringing Out the Dead, which is one of his great performances and a film that's really been overlooked in its time. I'm happy that it's kind of getting a second look as time has passed. I mean, 1999 was just such a packed year for movies. You can almost feel like, looking back now, it's like we didn't realize how good we had it. It was just like, it's just one or two interesting films every week, it seemed like for a while. So like you could get jaded, like, oh, just another Scorsese, Paul Schrader movie in which Nicolas Cage gives a really intense performance as a man at the end of his rope.
With John Goodman and Tom Sizemore,
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's easy to get spoiled, I guess. But yeah, I think he is finding interesting projects, like, even films that I feel like I underrated at the time, like City of Angels, which I think is a really, really solid supernatural romance. I think I got hung up on the idea of it being an American Wings of Desire, which I think it departs from that after a while. It actually has a darker ending than Wings of Desire, which is somewhat surprising. But that's one where he does like some of the, so much it's performed in close up, and I think he's kind of drawing on different elements of silent performance for that one, because it is so much done with his face and not any words. It's not a top tier film in his filmography, but it's a really solid one, and that's kind of looking for a way out of just doing action films, just as Meg Ryan, his co-star, who's also really good in the film, was trying to find a way away from twinkly rom-coms, or just making sure that she could do other things as well. She's sort of going for In the Cut and things like that, roughly around the same time. Yeah, talk about an underrated film. I didn't catch up with that until fairly recently, and I think that's quite a remarkable movie. Oh, it's unbelievable, and it's the thing that's interesting about that film is it came out when there were all these other sort of erotic thrillers, and I think it got really shoved in at the tail end of that genre, and I think it got shoved in that bag, and it's much dirtier and more, it's much more difficult to watch. It's giving you a much edgier idea than that sort of genre usually does. So I don't think it really belongs in that genre at all. So it's definitely one that I've only come to recently myself as well. I must admit I've not seen City of Angels, so that'll have to go on the list. Yeah, I don't want to raise your expectations too high because
better than Wings of Desire. You said better than Wings of Desire.
Vin Bender should have just retired after he saw it. Yeah,
brilliant. So we then you have like these action. Something that just occurs to me as we're talking about this, and we talk about the Coen brothers not having actors, who either join the ensemble or they don't work with them again. Cage has never really had a director that sort of made him his or her project, or do you know what I mean? Not in the same way that sort of Scorsese with De Niro and DiCaprio to some extent. He's worked with a lot of great directors once. David Lynch, Coen brothers, Alan Parker, Scorsese. Do you think that's just like his restlessness, that he just wants to go on and do something else with someone else?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not really sure. I know Figgis wanted to make him his De Niro after leaving Las Vegas, and then other opportunities called. He's worked with a couple of times. He worked with John Woo twice. The second time with Wind Talkers, which was roundly rejected at the time. I don't think it's not an imperfect film, but I think it's an underrated film. I think the expectations for that was like they wanted to see Face Off, and what they got was sort of John Woo doing a Hollywood version of Bullet in the Head, which is a film that's like just deeply uncomfortable with violence, deeply uncomfortable with war, kind of wanting to show viewers how awful it is to be in combat and the toll it takes on the psyche. It's like, I think it's quite effective at that, but it's not what not what summer movie audiences wanted at the time. He works with Schrader a couple of times. Paul Schrader, he was almost worked with him at the end of the 80s on a remake of Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which never happened.
That would have been good.
That would have been good. I think Schrader at that point and Cage at that point, it would have been a really interesting film. But he seems to have good relationships with people. He works with Turtletop 3 times on the National Treasure films and which The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that kind of ends that collaboration seemingly. But you're right. He does seem to kind of go from director to director, and nothing else. He can look back on his career and say, I worked with so many of the greats at the. Throughout my career.
When do you think, because there is this sort of transformation, and his most recent movie is probably the sort of crowning moment of this, where I find it similar to Keanu Reeves, where he started to become this sort of national treasure, this sort of like, when does that begin? When is that when does that moment start where he's becoming this guy that's just been around so long that we all have our ideas about him?
Yeah, it's a little easier to track that with Keanu Reeves because, he was in so many big movies and he was kind of made fun of, but you realize that he is a singular presence. Like perhaps maybe we were just kind of uncomfortable with how unusual he was. But with Reeves, he's a beautiful person to look at, and he has like this charisma that's not really, it's off the beat in some ways, and like people just I think affection kind of amounts for people the longer they stick around, particularly if they do a really good movie like John Wick. It's like, oh wait, we really like this Keanu Reeves fellow. With Cage, it's a little more difficult because Reeves he had some memes built around him, but he never had like sort of the semi-ironic cult that developed around Cage, particularly after the rise of YouTube, after the rise of GIF and meme culture, where it's like, let's celebrate this, but maybe we're also kind of making fun of it, but we also love it. Like it seems like, I think it was a combination of Gen X and millennial appreciation, but it seems like a very Gen X. I'm looping myself. This is my generation, so I can be a little critical of it, I think. But it's like, where it's like, I don't know if we're being ironic or not, But I feel like that I was really happy that Pig came out. I think a lot of that was misplaced. I think he's a really interesting actor. A lot of that's out of context, and sort of misappropriated. But as doing the book, that bore out my suspicions that like watching all his films would confirm that. But toward the end, I got a chance to see Pig, And it was really after the book was written, I do get like sort of a mention of it in the afterword. And I felt like it, justified the book. I was like, this is just, you can look at this is incontrovertible proof that Cage has a lot to offer. He's a really compelling presence. He has range. He can be small and quiet, and I think it's a neat film too, because it sets up this expectation that you are going to watch John Wick with a pig, or, Taken with a pig, or some sort of, revenge movie, and it's just really not that at all. It starts subverting your expectations really early on and becomes this really, I think it's a really profoundly moving film about grief and loss and how your identity shifts over time. So that felt like maybe a turning point, because I don't know that the whole world saw that movie, but anyone who did had, it's kind of tough to deny what you just seen. And I kind of hope Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent kind of allows them to draw a line and saying, okay, we had our fun with with the Nicolas Cage of the public perception of Nicolas Cage, with the jokes about infrugal spending, and maybe we can move on from that and just kind of appreciate Nicolas Cage as an actor. We'll see,
Yeah, it is weird, because there is this sort of, like, as you say, this sort of well-meaning mockery that at the same time fucking destroys the very thing that you're trying to do, which is be an actor and not just be this sort of like celebrity, I guess.
And I think he understands that there is humor in the bigness of some of his performances, and like some of the B-movie stuff, he's obviously just having fun. Like, in Jiu-Jitsu, not a great movie, but he's fun in it, and he wears Dennis Hopper's costume from Apocalypse Now with no explanation. It's just kind of like fun touches like that. I think he understands that there is entertainment to be had in watching an actor go as big as he does, but at times, but there's also, that's not just there to be laughed at. And you look at something like Mandy, which is a very big expressionistic performance, or becomes one, but it starts out, it only works because the first part of it is so grounded that you get to know this guy and get a sense of what he's lost and what's motivating him, and how deep his sadness goes as the film progresses.
And it even has that moment, that you highlight it, of him drinking the vodka in his underpants, which almost feels like the sort of tipping point of the movie, that now we're going to go into this territory.
Right. And it's, that moment when you see it with a crowd, it gets laughter, but it's not really laughing at what he's doing. I think it's just it's just laughter of discomfort, as you're not usually used to seeing that much raw emotion, and that unfiltered and like this unbroken cut, and this very performance with a lot of big moments in it, in that scene, but it feels real, and it feels like true to that character.
One of the things I got reading your book as well was this idea that there isn't really a slump. There isn't really a moment. Yeah, there's a lot of VOD films, as you say, but every year or two, there's some really amazing work. I mean, like Werner Herzog's Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans, is an absolutely stunning performance. And again, he finds a director who perfectly fits his sensibility.
Yeah, I mean, they both seem like, pairing Cage with Herzog, who's willing to experiment on the fly and diverge from how you think the film, that material would be directed in some ways, with an actor who does much the same. I think it really inspired. That's one of my favorite of his performances too, and one that I hope, I think I got a little overlooked at the time, but I hope people appreciate it for what it is now, because that's one you can cut to pieces and just show like the big freak out moments and miss the depth of the performance itself. But yeah, there's the low point in terms of him doing interesting work. It's pretty early in the VOD era. Like, he does Joe in 2013, and it's really one of his best performances. But after that, there's this film called Rage that's like a really by the book revenge thriller, mob revenge thriller. Nothing really of redeeming value in it at all. Left Behind, the faith-based apocalyptic film.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I kind of almost wonder if he does a James Franco in that he's sort of appearing in it as a part of some extended situations comedy.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Like, it's not, but it's not. That's not even like fun bad. It's not.
No.
And it's one of her duller performances too. There's only a handful of really like I'm bored watching Nicolas Cage films in the filmography, but that's definitely one of them. But I mean, there are a lot more. I wouldn't necessarily say everyone has to go watch all those movies, but there are a lot more interesting failures, near misses, things are just a little off, or a couple of real gems during that decade too. I mean, he makes 2 films with Paul Schrader, one of which is heavily tampered with by the studio, but there's a interesting film in there somewhere. Other which is deeply unpleasant dark comedy called Dog Eat Dog that I can't recommend it, but it's not dull.
Oh, I really like Dog Eat Dog.
Really? Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's freaking vicious, and it's got one of the darkest endings ever. But I found it. I guess I watched it having heard a lot of bad stuff about it, and I just thought, no, this is really good. I mean,
it's a Paul Schrader film, 100% that, but I wasn't not one of my favorites of his, but I don't know, maybe I need to go back and reappraise
What was the other Paul Schrader film that he made?
Dying of the Light, where he plays a CIA agent with dementia who's trying to track down a terrorist before he loses his faculties, and it's got a really nice Anton Yelchin supporting performance in it, and it was taken out of Schrader's hands. He actually released his cut to torrent services called Dark, and it's much shorter and has a really experimental ending to it. It's not entirely successful either, but it's not. It's of interest for sure.
Oh, I'm gonna dig that one up because I know that a lot less than Dog Eat Dog. I mean, I haven't seen it, and I've seen Dog Eat Dog. That's how I know. That's the difference of me knowing it. And Anton Yelchin, of course, tragic. A career cut short.
It seems like they work together really well. He does the voiceover. He reads Yelkin's letters in the documentary Love Antosha, and it's like Nicolas Cage reading teenage Anton Yelchin's writing, but which doesn't sound like it's going to work, but it really does. And I think he did it out of deep respect for Yelchin, who really fantastic actor. I would love to see what he would have done with the rest of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. I got an opportunity of interviewing him.
Wow.
A few months before he died. And it was he's just a nice. It was after the premiere of Green Room in Cannes. And he's just a really nice, relaxed, jokey, funny, hungover guy. It was, it's absolutely stupid tragedy, stupid sort of, not good. So, I mean, you had to watch all those VODs, and you've already given us sort of like some sense of the really rough ones and the low points, and some of the sort of hidden gems. But if you look at the sort of overarching, the whole of his career, you've said Raising Arizona already, but are there any other sort of gems that you would pick out that maybe other people don't know so well?
The ones I go to depends on the audience. Your audience probably is more familiar with than some audiences, but Bad Lieutenant Protocol New Orleans is one I always go to as an overlooked great performance. I really love what he does in Matchstick Men, the Ridley Scott, caper drama, dark comedy, whatever you call it. I think that's a really overlooked film. He plays a con artist with some form of OCD, Tourette's, and that's a performance that could just get lost in manners. But circling back to Raising Arizona, it's like he kind of builds out from the humanity of the person first. Other like gems, like there's like really in the VOD era, I always point out Mom and Dad. Do you know that one?
Yeah,
I like that one a lot. I mean, it's a fun dark comedy by Brian Taylor, who's half of the Neville Dean and Taylor crew team. But there's also like this really, he delivers this monologue about the disappointments of middle age and the sort of the ambiguous feelings one has about parenthood sometimes, and it really is just this career highlight, dramatic moment in the middle of a film in which otherwise devoted to parents trying to kill their kids. But yeah, I think it's a good one. The one I think nobody knows is a film called The Trust, which is, I think has a little trouble sticking the landing, but it's this really dark, darkly comedic crime film set in Las Vegas, co-starring Elijah Wood, where they are, pulling off a heist. And he just plays just an awful person in the midst of a bunch of awful people. But there's some fun comedic moments. Like there's this montage where he's clearly having the time of his life, going undercover as a hotel employee. And he gets a scene, maybe two scenes, I can't remember, with Jerry Lewis. It was an early inspiration, but he plays his father, and it's kind of nice to see those two sharing the screen. It's directed by a team called Alex Brewer and Ben Brewer, who mostly do music videos, but I don't know. I'd watch another feature they did. I like that one quite a bit.
Oh, I've not seen that. I'll have to dig that one out as well and see if I can track it down. In the book, you haven't interviewed Nicolas Cage himself or approached. Did you approach him?
I approached his people early on and said, I'm doing this book. I'd love to talk to him. I never heard back. I didn't really expect to, and it's okay because I didn't really want to be. I didn't necessarily want his voice in the mix. Like, I'd love to read a book in which he talked about his experiences in Hollywood, but that really wasn't the book I set out to write. So, it was fine. It was okay not having that access. As interesting as it might be, he has referenced the book in an interview with Rolling Stone.
Okay. What did he say?
He had nice things to say about it. It was. Cool. I think I forget what. It's not like I needed that as validation to have him approve of the book, but it was nice to hear. It was nice to hear that. To be
nice to hear that he knew you existed and the book existed, and I think
that seemed to like it. So
but I mean, it makes sense as well because it's not Cage on Cage, which would be, as I agree, I'd love to read that book. Someone doing a retrospective series of interviews for his career.
Wouldn't you like to see like a Matt Zoller Seitz, Wes Anderson style book with illustrations and an extensive interview?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that would be lovely as well. But I think that idea that goes from the very title, The Age of Cage, because it gives you a sense that this isn't just about Nicolas Cage. It's kind of like he's the droplet of water that's running down the hill, and you're getting to describe the hill as well as the drop of water, the contours. Because he's, when you look at his career, it's like, well, we were all crazy for David Lynch in the early 1990s, and then Wild at Heart comes out, and we're all crazy for John Woo, and Face Off comes out, and he seems to be hitting those cultural markers. The Rock was like a very decent action film, of which then spawned hundreds of not so decent action films, but so you get to see that title I felt was really the key to the whole book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it really is like coming with that name was really like the Dirk Diggler in the hot tub moment for me. It's like, and I think it helps sell the book. It is whatever you think of the book, it's a pretty catchy title.
I'm interested in how he's developed and how he's got this. I was comparing him to Keanu Reeves earlier, but in a sense, he's totally unique. There's some similarities there, but it's weird. It's so strange, and yet at the same time, I always feel, as with Joe, as with Birdie, that he's utterly convincing as literally, the everyday Joe.
Yeah, and like I'm not in terms of like him standing out. Like I make a reference early on to Eric Stoltz as one of the actors he says made fun of his name, and I don't want to get the impression I don't like Eric Stoltz. I think he's a really great actors still doing fine and interesting work all these years later. Like, you show me something that Eric Stoltz is in, like, oh, good, Eric Stoltz is in this. But at the same time, if you put those careers next to each other, who has had, you can't really compare them. Eric Stoltz does what he does very well. Cage is, out there doing a bunch of different things and has just sort of like this X factor that doesn't quite, that no one else quite has.
I mean, Cage is racking up like a number of credits on IMDb. It's like looking back at one of the old style studio stars who has, John Carradine or someone who has 100+ credits. He's got that sort of, what's the word? Not proficiency. It begins with a P.
Prolific. Yeah. I mean,
that's the word.
Right. I mean, he talks about how he likes to work. I mean, obviously there's a period where he was motivated by the need to work steadily to pay off bills, but I mean, he describes himself as someone who's just not that comfortable with leisure time, and doesn't always, it just feels like the sense he suggests he's just not his best self if he's not working. He's a little adrift. So I don't think that would change. I mean, the sheer number of films gets somewhat distorted by the amount of work he's just done in the last decade, where I'm looking at 2016, where he has, 6 credits. And, one of them is a supporting role. He has a small role in Snowden. The rest are all leads. I mean, it's an intense schedule.
And, you mentioned Eric Stoltz earlier as well. I mean, he had a bit of I think Sean Penn was sort of fairly unkind when he sort of says, oh, Cage is just playing Cage. It's beginning to play himself as a character in his films, which he took quite personally as well.
He did. Like, they were friends and then they weren't. I mean, Penn said some unkind things about him in the press, but I think also maybe around the same time, if you're a big star, there's inevitably a backlash, and I feel like maybe Penn's criticism kind of coincided with that backlash or the early stages, or sort of anticipated that backlash in some ways. But I mean, Penn's great, but I wouldn't trade, his career for Cage's, I mean, and I feel like in some ways he's it was really fun to see Penn in Licorice Pizza, like in a light kind of comedic role where he seemed like he was kind of having fun, where most of the time you just get him just as people carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and it's not always that interesting. I mean, he's done great stuff. I mean, I think his Milk is a really great performance, but it's there's an inconsistency to it in some ways. I don't know. I don't want to turn this into Sean Penn stinks, because Sean Penn doesn't stink. I like Sean Penn a lot, generally speaking.
Except when he writes novels, of course. We have to make that clear.
Right. Well, I couldn't speak from experience there.
Believe me. Keith, the last question I have to ask you is, could you recommend a film book for our listeners? So a film book that has inspired you, or that you just liked.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, I'm just most recently, I really loved Dana Stevens' Buster Keaton book, and Cameraman, which we did as a friend. So I'm a little inclined to like it anyway. But I do love, kind of. It's the type of film book I like where it's, you learn a lot about the film, the subject and the filmmaking, but also the culture around it. The digressions in it are worth the price of admission alone. But I mean, honestly, I was always more of I came to read Roger Ebert later. I was more of a TV watcher of Roger Ebert because as a kid, I didn't have any way to get his reviews, and I did not buy his books. And I probably should have. Now I enjoy going back and reading his old reviews a lot. Like, I don't always agree with him, but whenever I'm researching something, I was like, I want to get what was Ebert's take on this, I mean, really, the single probably most influential book for me was, like I referenced before, is Leonard Maltin's TV Movies, which was this thick, pocket paperback sized, proportioned movie guide filled with capsule reviews. And it was just the breadth of, it wasn't every movie, but it felt like every movie. And just to be able to go and reference that. And they were often just really well written. It wasn't just Moulton. A lot of it was Mike Clark from USA Today and a couple of other people. But there's a capsule review of Dawn of the Dead, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. But it's also just as a piece of writing, it's probably 75 words, but it's such an evocative description of that movie. It's kind of stuck with me as probably as influential of a review as I've ever read. In the formative years as a critic. It's
sort of like the haiku version of a movie review, getting one of those capsule reviews that are really good.
And I write a lot of capsules, as I do the monthly previews for Rolling Stone. I do a lot of list work and things like that, and I take that stuff really seriously. I think it is to condense thoughts like that is a skill.
It's an art form in itself in some ways. And what about now that you've done your Age of Cage? Has that sort of whetted your appetite to do some more another book?
I'd love to do another book, and for one reason or another, I haven't gotten another one going yet. My friend Steve Hyden, the music critic, always seems like publish one book to announce the next. And I'd love to be that kind of writer. But maybe down the road. But I'm just I loved doing this, but I recognize what a huge commitment. This is more than a year of my life immersed in Cage stuff, watching, writing, researching, which was a pleasure. But I need the next book to be as exciting for me to do as this one was. I bounced around a few ideas. We'll land on something somewhere. I hope.
And you'll come and talk to me when you
absolutely anytime. Just drop me a line.
Okay, that was Keith, and that was Nicolas Cage. I think that's about as in-depth as I've ever looked at Nicolas Cage's career, and many times during this series of podcasts, I'm just struck by once you delve in, how interesting things become. Everything is fascinating if you look at it the right way, I think. And Nicolas Cage, wow, what a crazy career. I mean, this cult figure, and yet at the same time, this massively popular popcorn movie star. The man's an enigma. I mean, he's so weird, and yet at the same time, he just plays these ordinary joke kind of characters, as we were talking about in the conversation. Keith, what light you shone. What a great thing. I'm so grateful for him to come along and talk to us about that. Okay, so I guess there's nothing else to do. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be where it can, but I'm going to keep the interviews rolling and the episodes coming out. So hopefully there won't be a break, and I'm hoping they'll record some stuff in Cannes as well. That would be great. Thanks go to Ali Harwood for the artwork, Elliot Atkins for the music, and thank you also to you, the listener. Your support is never taken for granted. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next week.
$1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.